Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about LeetCode questions. So let's get into it. So the question in question was actually while I was making the previous video, the person who reached out actually wrote back before I was even done to follow up with, "Hi Frederick, with respects to pull requests, I mostly did LeetCode type questions and built very small projects. With respect to the code in an industry code base, it's hard for me to understand how the hell it's working, and it's really making me doubt if my intellect is not up for this field, or if there's something I'm doing that is completely incorrect. Any tips on this, or have you ever faced this?" Well, this is pretty much what I've been telling you guys for quite a few years now, actually. I don't even remember now, but yeah, it's been a while, and this is not something that anybody ever wants to hear from me. But the reality is, guys, that there is no way to say you should not do LeetCode questions or you should only do LeetCode questions, because you need both. The reason why you need both is because in some cases the interview stage tests you with algorithmic questions, because some people think that's fun. Some hiring managers, they do this. Don't ask me why. I know why, but there's a range of reasons, but that may not necessarily be the best, in my opinion, way of doing it. Because the second you get into the industry, you're gonna get a taste of real software, real code. And real code is much bigger than a LeetCode function, which is usually what you're dealing with, like one or a few functions, maybe a class or something like that. It's not that complicated. In the real code bases, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of functions, and thousands, if not millions, depending on how big the repo is, lines of code. And that complexity is a lot to take in. It's very, very, it's gigantic for someone who's new to, and you're going to feel overwhelmed. It's basically a guarantee, I can promise you that much. And on top of that, you realize very quickly that just in order to get the project going or getting it started, you need to know 100 other things that has nothing to do with computer science or algorithms, or maybe not even your specific programming language. And how do you get the repo? Well, you need a version control system somehow. Yeah, that means that you need to understand a shell or something like a client, like a Git client or something like that. What's that? And now all of a sudden it starts cascading on you. So if the only thing you've been doing through college is the thing that they're teaching you in the class, unless your college or your school or whatever you're doing has some very serious people from the industry who actually know that this is the case, and they teach you that stuff, you're going to be so out of your depth that it's insane, because your first day is going to be spent just trying to figure out how to use Git, most likely, if you've never done it before. And so that's why I tell software developers, don't go and you focus on these LeetCode things because you want to go in and work for Google, or like in this case it's Amazon, because you're going to get eaten alive. It's great to practice LeetCode questions. Make, as I've said, 80-20, guys. That should be 20% of what you spend your time on. Maybe if you're like really, really nervous, or like you really want to push it, but the 80%, it should be focused on the practicalities of shipping software, personal projects, tutorials, learning how to use the tools within the ecosystem, because without that you're not going to be able to do anything, which is the case here. You're going to be completely lost. And even that is going to be more preparation, but it's not going to be enough preparation to deal with a large code base. So what I basically suggest to you here is that do exactly what I just said. Go and take a few tutorials on the basics and create a goal for yourself. The goal should be to get your code into production. That is the only thing you should care about. It does not matter if that code is 100% of the feature or 10% of the feature or anything like that. You need to be able to ship something into production and have that thing work and sort of see that it actually did the thing it's supposed to be doing. Just doing that is going to be enough to to get you started. Once you have done that, if you're in a new company and you're trying to figure out all this sort of stuff, the next thing is to figure out, all right, now I know how to get something in there, even if it's the tiniest, if it's just a comment, it doesn't matter what it is, you just has to get all the way through so you understand how the flow works. My first day on a new team, guys, I always ask for an intro story, which can be a small CSS fix, or it can be updating, refactoring a piece of function with a nicer name. It doesn't mean not anything, it's a tiny little thing, it's just so I can follow through. Alright, so these are all the steps we're going to take now in order to get the software out into production. So those basics, when you know that, well, now you need to figure out how the code works. And to do that, you need to look at your story card and understand sort of what you're trying to do, because the first mistake most juniors make is that they try to understand the whole system at one go. You're never going to do that. I promise you that much. Even in a mid-size, a small-size project, it's not going to happen. Because the software is so complicated and so gigantic when it comes to the amount of code and logic and so forth, that you're not going to be able to have all of that in your head. It takes a long time. Even a senior level developer was not going to do that. It takes enormous amounts of practice and familiarity with the code base to learn that stuff. So the thing that you have to do is to learn how to, well, to divide and conquer. You need to understand where the logic that you care about for your feature, where does that live in the code? And let's take, in my favorite example is, let's say that you're dealing with an API of some sort. If you're I'm not sure if you're a backend developer or a front-end developer, but it doesn't really matter all that much, because the trigger system is basically the same. If it's a front-end application, go to the place in the UI where you're supposed to do something, that the functionality should live. Right. Find that place in the code where you see the interface, if you're going to add a component or whatever you're going to do, like a button, it doesn't really matter. And go and make sure that you find that place, and then add a stub little component, something just silly to your local environment to see that it actually shows up the way that you're expecting. Now you found your general work area. This is the place in the code that you want to deal with. Back in the same thing. Find the network call. Find the endpoint that takes in the request that is going to do something that is part of the work that you're supposed to do. Now you have your start, your entry point into the piece of information, the piece of logic that you're looking for. Now you can use a debugger or log statement or something like that and just send in a request and see what happens, and start following the flow of the code and start reading up, because everything, if you can find the event that you're going to trigger, because there's usually some types of interaction that you're dealing with, once you've found that, you've found your entry point into that specific part of the program. And that is the best place to start. And then you just start traversing down, because every program is more or less, not always, a tree. It's just a sequence of nodes in a tree structure, and if you can always follow them all the way down to you find some type of database call, or something that goes to an external network type of thing, etc., etc. But this is what I would suggest that you do in order to figure out sort of how things work within the code base. And then you do this just over and over and over for years and years and years. And even when you're a super senior, I guarantee you it's going to be the exact same process for the rest of your career, basically. So, what I want you to take away from this is that LeetCode is not real programming. Well, it is real programming, but it is not a good representation of what it is to work as a professional software developer. It is something that people do for fun. It's something that they do for theory and to enhance their theoretical skills. It's a very important thing that you can do if you want to make sure that you can nail every sort of interview. And it's also a lot of, as I said, it's a lot of fun, and it has a lot of useful skills tied into it, but it's not the whole story. In many cases, I would say it's 20%. The 80% value comes from the fact that you understand how the surrounding tools and how all the things are related to the software development process actually works, and that includes programming, of course. But you don't have to be like a crazy person and go, as I was saying, be a pure academic. You're not going to survive your first day. I promise you're not gonna. Because nobody cares if you can optimize a Fibonacci algorithm, or if you know the difference between running a dry or using memoization or shit like that in the actual work life. That is where the tooling and the general knowledge is more important. That's the thing that makes you ship code. That's the thing that's going to give you pull requests and so forth. The other stuff is important in order to do that really, really well. But if you can't even do the basics, that doesn't matter. So that's the thing that you should take tutorials on. Make sure that you have an understanding of that. Do not mistake like your LeetCode rankings or like all the things you're doing in school for real programming. It's not real programming, I promise you that. The second you come into the real workplace with like real serious software development is taking place, you're going to have a million times as much code as you've ever touched in your entire life. There's going to be very little documentation. Nobody's going to hold you by the hand in many cases, and you're going to start feeling like, oh shit, there's too much going on. That's when I tell you, try to just avoid focusing on understanding the whole system in one blow. You're not gonna. Try to figure out what the scope is of what you're trying to do, like your story, like the piece of work you're supposed to do, and focus in on that part of the code. Where is that thing happening? When you can find the place you're supposed to be working, you found your area. That's what you focus on, and then you repeat story after story, and after a while you're going to have found that you've touched most places in the code, and now you sort of know how everything fits together. That's a better strategy for you than trying to like understand the whole picture immediately. Have a great day.